Hello everyone, welcome to the Q&A Cafe here in Georgetown at the Georgetown Club. And we're very lucky today because we're having what I call a very Georgetown-centric Q&A. And our guest is Rory Veevers-Carter, who has managed to fly under the radar in so many ways in Georgetown while still doing something very important for the community, and that was restoring what's known as the Julia Child House. So welcome, Rory.
Thank you.
Rory and I have known each other for a long time, and don't read anything into this, but I asked him if he wanted a drink because we spend a lot of time sitting in my garden having afternoon cocktails, and I'm kind of triggered, and it's not typical to be sitting and talking to him without, something. But anyway, we'll do our best. He's a true Brit and enjoys a nice afternoon libation and cigar. Is that fair to say?
After 6 o'clock, anytime.
Okay, after 6. Okay, well, anyway.
That's the public version.
Okay, well, I understand the public version and respect it, but you're in a safe zone here. You can weave in and out of your narrative
so
as you wish.
This is like Las Vegas?
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll only be on YouTube and seen all over the world. But anyway, but I thought we'd just start by talking about the house itself, because as much as Julia has a history, the house has a history even before Julia.
Oh, many histories, I think.
And I think it's a history that's important to the history of the village of Georgetown. So why don't you tell us its origin story?
Ooh, there's a lot of exploration. I mean, one of the things which we did early on was decided we were going to build down to get into the story. I remember telling the contractors there to continue digging until we run out of wall. And when we got down about 15 feet, there was a wall still going down. I have no idea how far it goes down, but it was one house, which the Julia Child House had been built upon. And then we discovered on another wall that house had been built upon another house. So there are two houses underneath. One was more like the stone house. And then when I got Tom over from the US Department of Fine Arts, he did a little talk on it. Mm-hmm. Came over and he sort of determined that area was the old harbor, P Street Harbor. It had come down there, and these were probably storage bins from the days when the boats used to come up and down that river because it was on a hill. But I think that was the more fascinating part, was actually the number of homes that have been built upon each other.
Did you find any relics? Now, I guess you didn't find any bones, which is not unheard of in Georgetown. But
the only bones I did find were cut bones, so they'd always been used for stews and things.
So animal bones,
yeah,
presumably. Yes, we'd like to think. Who built the house that we think of as the house on Olive Street? I've got notes here if you need me to prompt. Well, no, okay, so why don't you talk about, I think it's Mr. Murphy?
Yes, Mr. Murphy.
Okay, tell us about Mr. Murphy.
Well, the interesting one is, the only thing I really found out about him is he was the dean or the rector for the Baptist Church, the Zion Baptist Church. And he was one of the last one of the last African Americans in the Georgetown area, because he was right on the border there. And I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who gentrified the area. Mm-hmm. But he did stay on there until he died, and his wife actually died in the house. And he built it, and he built it as a sort of tenement house, where you could rent parts of it, and it was built along, it was added too, because each room we found was on a different level and a different skew.
And then
when we took the walls away inside, it was definitely built with material that would have been obtained from other building sites. So it's probably the extra pieces of wood that he found lying around, because he was a carpenter. In the papers, the only thing I found out about him is he was fined 10 cents for being hit by a wagon or something like that.
He was fined?
He was fined, yes.
Oh, well. Okay. His name was Edgar Murphy, and according to my notes, his wife remained in the house until her death in 1914. Mm-hmm. Were you able to find out, I know the houses across the street from you are very, very modern, but the houses going along the street from you, were any of them of the same period, or could that house have been a standalone house
It
initially?
was definitely a standalone house. I mean,
Yeah.
the maps which I saw from about 1865 and earlier depict three houses, very well separated from each other. That house appeared around 1865. The other ones came in much later.
So she moved out in 1914, and I don't know that we know a lot of what happened between then and when Paul and Julia Child bought the house. They bought it in 1948, and then they only lived there a short time before they went to France. And it was when she came back from France that it really began to accrue the cultural importance it has now.
Yeah, I mean, the house she set up a school there for teaching the ladies of Georgetown how to cook. Because I think, to be fair, American cooking at that stage was probably about as good as English cooking in the 1980s. And then...
I think Paris changed her.
Yes, well, Paris changed her. She also changed America, I think, in their impressions of cooking. But through the school, she sort of established that, and she did also the testings of all the recipes for the first volume, I believe, were done there. The other fun things that were in the house, I mean, for example, the stove, what do you call it?
The Garland stove.
The Garland stove, which is actually now owned by Blue Star.
The Smithsonian has it.
Well, the Smithsonian has it. So the stove actually started its life in this house and then moved up to Maine. And then after Maine, ended up in the Smithsonian. One of the first dishwashers, too, was there, too.
And she also had something she called the Pig, which was the first garbage disposal.
Yes.
That I don't get the connection, but...
Well, the sound.
Oh, I see. Okay. Wasn't how much it ate when you... so they lived there. She said the first thing she needed was a stove, and she got the stove, and she really created a kitchen. And then a woman lived there, and then for something like 25 years, it was just a rental. And it was mostly college kids, and as one of them at least owned up to, it was largely a party house, and that showed. When you walked into the house, was there anything in the kitchen that was original to her time there?
In the house that I walked into, no.
Okay. Except in the location, for example.
The location, yes.
Right down on the lower level. Right.
But the interesting thing is that later on, when we started the renovation, we discovered that Jacobson really didn't take down...
Hugh Jacobson.
Didn't do a full renovation. What he did was just put plasterboards back up on top of the old plasterboards. So after we removed those, we did find her kitchen.
Yeah.
Behind it all. We actually found some of the old windows as well in the original colors. And the colors I estimate to be around that period of time because my grandmother had the same colors in her house. And I think it was just Sears Roebuck had a big sale on greens and blues or something.
It was interesting shades.
Yes.
Yeah, there is kind of a Julia Child aquamarine or teal, I suppose.
And what we did is when, during the renovation afterwards, and this is one of the hardest things with the contractors was to explain to them, you need to preserve a bit of history here. Was you can't cover up this wall. You have to leave this wall alone. They kept on when you go back. So I end up preserving part of the wall where you see the kitchen cabinets and the window which we found behind another wall with the original colors and made that sort of like, as I called it, the window into history.
Did you have to keep the Hugh Jacobson addition in the back, those columns? I mean, did you want to?
One, I did have to keep them.
You had.
Secondly, they were spectacular.
Okay.
I mean, huge glass windows. It took me an awfully long time to find a manufacturer.
Just that it wouldn't have seemed to me to be indigenous to the original house, you know.
Oh, actually not.
So I would just think that you, but you were required to keep it because it was Hugh Jacobson, or just because?
I think Georgetown has a rule that if it's over 25
I
years,
see.
you must keep it.
Like the trees.
Why?
Yeah. Well, no. Georgetown has
lots. You may ask the gods.
Georgetown has lots of rules, and I'm sure you met every one of them, and we'll get to that. But why did you buy the house? What was the motivation? What were you looking for? Were you looking for that house?
it'd be lovely to say that I was looking for Julia Child's house, but no.
Well, I mean in a big...
It was
yeah.
serendipitous, actually, because
Yeah.
there's a section of the Washington Post which I never read, which is called the Style section.
Yeah.
And
They still have it?
for some reason, one day I was in the kitchen and I opened up the Style section. There on page 2 was a rather dilapidated looking house in Georgetown for sale. And it said, Julia Child's home, you can have it. And I was looking for a dilapidated home in Georgetown. So the two sort of matched. I remember my grandmother had been constantly watching Julia Child, and my son had, when he came over from Europe, had spent a lot of time on her bed as well watching the shows. So it just seemed to fit.
Yeah, yeah. But you did, well, yes, you knew when you went to see it that it was Julia Child's house, okay. But had you been looking at other houses in Georgetown?
Nope.
So it wasn't necessarily Georgetown.
I had just
it was
finished-
this house spoke to you when you saw that story.
I was just finished my house up in Fessenden Street. Mm-hmm. For years, I've been trying to move down from the outer boroughs of Washington, D.C. down to civilization. And this was my opportunity.
So it must have seemed like an impossible task. I mean,
Oh, no. It was like a gift. There's a package, you know. It's quite well wrapped.
you like a challenge.
No. It was well wrapped. The walls looked okay. The outside looked okay. You know, there were mice in the walls and some birds, but you get rid of those. But it didn't look that bad.
Didn't you have plants growing out of the walls?
Well, there's a mushroom farm, I think.
Tell me this. Had you not bought it, how much longer would it have lasted before falling down?
I don't think it would have survived another earthquake.
Well, since we
There
don't
were a
have
couple of areas when we finally took the walls away and discovered what the shell that was there was in pretty bad condition.
Yeah.
There was an entire second floor which was held up by a 4-inch piece of metal hanging on a 1/4 inch on the wood. So one little shift of that house that had gone. One of the bathrooms was just hanging there. I don't know why it was still up. I think it's just the concrete on the walls holding it. The back frame completely rotted out. So we had to replace that as well. It was on the edge.
And you moved in.
Well, I had this idea that, I mean, when I go into a house, I'm building them for myself because that's where I want to live. So I decided I was going to go in there for 6 months, understand the bones of the house, and then think about the renovation.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, 6 months, I'll be in there, understand the bones, I'll get my plans, and I'll get my permits, and I'll start renovating.
And the neighborhood will embrace me.
And the neighborhood, we do hope that will happen, but
We'll get to that.
I didn't understand about Georgetown rules. It took me 3 years to get to the first stage.
Well, and let's talk about one of the more interesting, and to me it was surprising impediments. At the very outset, like right after you bought it, I took you to a party I was invited to at the Smithsonian that was given by the Julia Child Foundation, and it was sort of about her kitchen and all that. And I think we went thinking that the Julia Child people would be delighted to meet you. But that was not the case, was it?
I think I didn't cut my hair that week or something.
No. But talk a little bit, because I know you all ended up becoming friends. But talk a little bit about the headwinds you faced once it became public that you wanted to renovate this house, and you were logically calling it the Julia Child house.
Yeah, I mean, the Julia Child Foundation, I can understand their way. I mean, you know, they're there to protect her name. Mm-hmm. This is the Julia Child house, and you can't erase history. Their gut feeling was the house wasn't important. And I think even the guy from the New York Times, when he wrote that long article about it, sort of faced that uphill task. He had a worse time than I did because I just ignored them, as they ignored me. But he was like trying to get teeth out of a crocodile to get them to even accept that the house was important. And we're like, you know, well, this is where the cooking school started. This is where the books were edited. This is where the stove started. That's just across the street over there.
Yeah.
But they, you know, they're protected. And when you're paid to protect the name, you protect the name.
Well, I know you got cease and desist letters.
We got cease and desist letters much later on when the sale process started.
Yeah.
And there was nothing we could do. I mean, you know, the the papers were picking it up, saying this is Julia Child
Yeah,
House. It
yeah.
was the Julia Child
Yeah.
House. But the board was at that time. I
Did they ever come to see it? Did they ever come? Because I want to say, I don't know how many of you have been in it, garden tours, house tours, things like that. And I know Rose Park is about to have their annual fundraiser there. But the detail is exquisite that you use to, I mean, the house is meticulous. Go ahead, talk about how meticulous it is. Well, I choke.
Well, as I was building it for myself, I mean, I spent an awful lot of time sitting around and thinking what I was doing. For example, we saved a lot of the old beams, which I ended up sanding down personally, and tongue waxing, tongue oiling, and we put those back up into the kitchen to keep as much of the old house as possible. The staircase is going down. I mean, I think I spent about 3 months sitting on the floor trying to figure out what I was going to do with this staircase, because I didn't want a traditional stodgy one which was going to cut away the wall. And between myself and the singing steel guy, we came up with this design as you see there today, a sort of arch back of a whale. And you can still see all the light going through. And I kept, again, the wood from the old floorboards, not the floorboards, sorry, the joists, to make the treads of the stairs.
Yeah.
So we tried to keep as much of the history of the house together, as much of the old house as possible.
All of the woodwork's exquisite. It really just feels so handcrafted. It just feels like every little detail is bespoke, and so what I point in my saying this is, did anybody from the Julia Child Foundation ever come to see what you had created?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well.
They were invited.
No, I'm sure they were, and I'm surprised because I think in a lot of ways she would have been honored.
She would have been, I presume from their perspective, here is somebody coming in to do a house.
You were rogue. You were a rogue agent.
Absolutely rogue. And you don't know who this person is, so you're going to keep arm's distance. I do believe that Bob Reese and Jennifer, who actually bought the house, are now on better terms with them, and they're talking and things are going on. Plus,
because they're not you.
Plus, I gave them back 2 domains which I had registered.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope that any opportunity, if you haven't been, if there's an event you can go to, you should go see it. Let's talk about the kitchen, because obviously that had to be one of the more strategic parts of the renovation. I love here where your architect, and this is so you, Rory, your architect was Dale Overmeyer, though I imagine you were always telling him what to do rather than the other way around. But he says when you were planning the kitchen, you required 22 feet of uninterrupted counter space, and you wanted enough room for 12 people to dine in, and a 5 by 7 foot kitchen island. And Dale says he wanted me to know that the island had to be strong enough for a 200-pound pig to be rendered, prepared, and served. Overmeyer says this is for extreme cooking. But tell us about the kitchen. Obviously, you didn't have the Garland stove, but what stove did you arrive at that you felt was, worthy?
I was trying to get the Blue Star stove, and Blue Star were very happy to provide it at a fee. Unfortunately, during COVID, the supplies dried up, and we couldn't end up doing it. I thought it'd be really fitting to have the company which was actually built the original stove put in the new one.
Yeah, Garland.
But we ended up with Viking.
Yeah.
But it's a 10-burner stove, and which I cook a lot. And during the times when I'm cooking, minimum I need is 6.
Yeah.
And 10 I would use quite often. So to me, this is what I wanted. I wanted my 10-burner stove. I was tired of shifting things around.
Before you sold it, did you ever get that 200-pound pig to test the...
Actually, I have a 350-pound pig arriving in 2 weeks' time.
Where are you putting that? In the new house?
I have no idea.
Maybe you can ask
the new house. No, the counter there is a bit too small. But
Tom's here from the club. Maybe they might want you to bring it over here. See what they can do with it. Yeah, because I think that's interesting. Something you very much have in common with Julia is that you are a cook. I mean, I would say you're not a foodie in the sense, I know you're not drawn to going out to restaurants, but
I've been to two in Washington.
you're a food lover. You're not a food fanatic, but you do love to cook. Much like her, she just loved to be in the kitchen cooking, and so, can you recall a meal that you made in this kitchen after you got it done finally that will be special to you?
Probably the first meal I cooked in the house, actually, because by the time the kitchen was finished, the decision had been made over my head to sell the house.
So you couldn't burn it down.
I would like to try it, but then I got to bring in all the dishes. I got to do all this. I was just like,
Okay.
I had my time here.
Okay. Well, that's.
But the first dish which I cooked in the house did take me a long time to think about, and I've lived in many places around the world. My favorite cuisines are usually Asian, Indian especially, and so I cooked this dish which was a French fusion of Indian. It's Provençal lamb shanks with a creamy madras sauce on top of better rice. So I do remember that one.
Did any chefs come in and talk to you about the kitchen as you were doing it, or come in to try it out?
There's a lady from Riz. I can't remember her name. She came over a
Riz.
couple of times.
Riz is her name. Yeah.
Riz. The guys from the, I
Riz
think the
Lacoste.
wife of this chef from the Four Seasons spent quite a bit of time there.
Mm-hmm.
I had other chefs. I had quite a few requests from young chefs to come by, especially if they were getting engaged, getting married, and things like that, so they could perform
that's
and
so
do
wonderful.
it in her kitchen.
I love that. You found elements from the past that you think are related to Julia that you preserved in like shadow boxes or in the walls, or explain what you did with that. That there are down by the kitchen sort of a homage wall to Julia.
Well, one of the things about the house is that none of the walls are straight. So we had to build a box inside the box. And in some places you find, if you go to the house, you'll see there's a window down in the kitchen, which was a window which we found against one of the walls behind another wall. So I kept the colors, cleaned it up, and then placed some articles that you would have found in the kitchen. There's some things I found in the house, and then I took a couple of articles from my grandmother, because she had a Julia Child kitchen. I mean, she had the pegboards, the works in her New York house and the Cape Cod house. So I took a couple of the old pieces from the 50s, which she'd used, and placed them in there as well. And then I spoke to
It's lovely.
the guys at Mark T. Wendell, because I mean, our family's been buying tea from Mark T. Wendell for 120 odd years. And Julia Child was also buying tea. And if you go to the Smithsonian, she's got all the Mark T. Wendell tea cans up there. So I called up Mark.
Mm-hmm.
He'd sold the company, but the new owner was quite happy to send out some cans, so I put them in there as well.
How much research did you do about her? Did you do reading? There several movies and documentaries out about her. Did you dive into any of that? Or?
At the beginning, yes. I sort of dived in to see, I knew her cooking, but as a person, no.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know her at all. One of the things I tried to do was find pictures of her in that kitchen. I mean, I kept on trying to find, proof that she was actually there, besides just owning the house. And after about a year, I came to the realization that in the 50s and 60s, husbands were not going to spend a lot of money on very expensive Ektachrome, taking pictures of their wives and friends in the kitchen. Why would you do that? I found plenty of pictures of holidays, which they were doing, but nothing in the house.
I don't think anybody took pictures of themselves in the kitchens back then. Yeah, no, we can't. Living in the era we live in now, where every single thing we do gets photographed, it's difficult to imagine a time when that wasn't so. And you're right, because the cameras were unwieldy, and nobody really, unless you were into it, you didn't have them. And she struck me as I think that she was probably a shy person until she discovered how much she liked the red light of a TV camera, and and being on the air. Let's take a moment to talk about your family, because you've mentioned your grandmother a couple times, and you have I think you have an origin story of your own that Julia Child would quite enjoy. You were raised in the Seychelles, living on an island, barefoot for about 13 years before your grandmother sent some shoes.
Yes, I used to embroider my feet.
Yeah. But tell us about your grandmother, your grandfather. Tell us about your family history for a moment, because it's wonderful.
Cool.
It's okay.
We do have a relation that's buried at Trinity Church in 1500s, but I'll go much further along. It's an old New York family. The American side of the family is very American, and my mother actually escaped from New York society to go to Africa in the 50s as soon as she graduated from Radcliffe, and never came back. And as she said in her book, to get away from her mother and New York. My grandmother was a very formidable lady, born in 1900, married Clarence Day, of Life with Father and the films and books and things like that. So that is, that's that side of the family.
And they had the newspaper.
Did you see that one about the hoax, the moon hoax?
No. We'll talk about the newspaper.
Yeah, my grandfather was actually born in 1868. So in our side of the family, we missed a generation. And he was there with Teddy Roosevelt going up San Juan Hill, where he ended up getting polio. But his grandfather was Benjamin Day, who owned the New York Sun, who had the first great hoax of men on the moon, of which I think 95% of New Yorkers in the 1840s actually believed.
It's probably easy to spread that kind of hoax back then. But your mother ran away from all that.
She ran away from it all, ended up in Kenya with a gentleman by the name of Otis Barton, rather madman, who's actually invented the bathysphere to save people going down in submarines. But he decided he was going to go off to Africa, to the Red Sea, and needed two nubile young ladies with red hair to float in the Red Sea while sharks attacked. But by the time they got to Kenya, and a couple of months later, they'd left him behind, found other more pleasing young men around, and Otis went off on his own and did his film. I never saw the film. But my mother continued in Kenya until her then boyfriend decided he was going to go and fight the Mau Mau. And so she said to hell with that and started going north, because she'd heard about a guy up in Port Sudan who walked around with a coat late at night like Count Dracula. So she went off to find him. Ended up meeting, then ended up in Yemen, which was then the protectorate of the Hadhramaut then. Aden, Al-Mukalla, where I was born.
So this was Mr. Veevers-Carter?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. And then they made some arrangements with the British government to get an island? Is that it?
Well, there's rather remote places. I mean, our island, we have a couple there. I mean, one was confiscated early on by the president because he wanted it as his home, because it was relatively close to the main island of Mahe.
Yeah.
Our second island was much further away, much closer to Madagascar. As we put it, our nearest supermarket was 750 miles away across the ocean. And we had a boat come every 6 months with deliveries, which usually meant my grandmother had to get our Christmas presents to us around June.
How big was the island?
It wasn't that large. It's 1,200 acres.
Okay, that's not large at all.
No, but it had a lagoon in the middle, because all the, most of the Seychelles Islands are lagoons. I mean, Aldabra is a classic example of that. And if you don't know Aldabra, and if you've been to the Galapagos, you need to go to Aldabra.
So was the house there, or did you have to build a house, or did you have a house?
Yes.
Kidding.
No, it's an old thatch place. I mean,
Yeah.
It had been, somebody had been there about 50 years earlier, so there was a structure.
Yeah.
But we built quite a few houses on the second island.
Yeah. And so it was you and brothers, sisters?
My brother and my sister,
Yeah.
my father, mother, and we had about 50 workers.
It had to be an idyllic life for a boy and a girl. I mean, for children, period.
Well, it's idyllic. I mean,
living on
the idea of disappearing to a desert island is always very appealing until you actually do it.
Well, and also you didn't know you were, right?
No, I mean, I was quite happy. I mean, I knew nothing else besides desert islands. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I was well entertained. I mean, I didn't actually see electricity until I was about 10. And my first TV was around 11. I remember it was Casper, the Friendly Ghost in Mombasa.
But then a point came when you had to leave the island and actually go get an education, right?
Well, that only came about because my father passed away out there. And my grandmother, at that stage, had been following her daughter's travels around the world, came out and saw her opportunity, came and grabbed her and said, it's time to come home. Which my mother said, okay, but I'm actually going to go back to England rather than the United States. And it took her 3 years to move. In that period of time, I was sent off to boarding school in England, which was very normal in those days for English expats to have their children shipped off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you feel British and American, more British, more American? What are they conflicting sides, or have they melded well?
I've been to university over here. I've been to school over there. If England is playing the United States in soccer, there's no way I'm going to support America.
Would you go back and live in England?
But I mean, I'm quite happy in both countries.
Yeah, but you've made your home here. You raised your children here.
I mean, England is a lovely place. It's nice green fields and all the rest of it. But, you know, European winters to me are bloody awful. Yes, I can't take that seeping English cold. I mean, I grew up in the tropics.
So was it the island that created your palate, your love of food, what you love to eat, your love of spice?
Spice, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the cooking of East Africa is mainly Indian cooking. I mean, the Szechuan had about 3 dishes. It consisted of putting your fish in water and a couple of vegetables, maybe occasionally some salt. But it wasn't very complicated. I mean, my actual love of cooking came much later on from my grandmother. Really. When I finished university, went back to New York, and I was living there at the house, and she liked to cook. Mm-hmm. And she liked to cook French and Italian, which was interesting to me, but I wanted to do my Indian.
Yeah.
So we had these great conflicts in the kitchen about how to do it.
If you had only 3 ingredients, what would they be?
Ooh, a pig.
Okay, that's one.
It'd have to be salt and pepper.
Well, we could count that as one.
Okay, count that as one.
Well, because they're so often married.
Chili.
Chili? Yeah, there you go.
It'd have to be, yes. I think with those 3 ingredients, you could probably do most. So as long as your food is fresh. Yeah, if the stuff is fresh, you don't have to do anything to it. Just cook it.
I know you loved fish, and that was probably also, you probably learned that growing up on an island.
Oh, every morning from the age of about 3, I was casting out a fishing line.
Yeah, I don't imagine you had access to much meat, right? I mean, were there animals on them?
We had chickens.
Yeah.
You know, I had the brown ones. No, my mother had the brown ones. I had the white ones. My sister had the black ones.
Oh, that's got to be tough.
And we had some pigs. That was it.
Were they ever 200 pounds?
I can't remember them then. I mean, I was really small.
They didn't live long enough to get that big.
But I went back in 2019, and we'd left in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the pigs had gone feral. And the Szechuan government had actually rounded them up and put them in. And some of them were pretty large. You know, I mean, the tusks were about this size. So they'd really gone feral.
You have started a new house here in Georgetown, a new renovation, right? Tell us about that house.
Well, it's a continuation of Olive Street, actually. It's on Potomac Street. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think if Olive Street or Potomac Street, once upon a time, must have touched each other. And I remember after selling the Julia Child house, I turned around to Jonathan Taylor of Tut and said, look, you know, you've turfed me out of that house. Now I need another project.
Yeah.
And this one, they were thinking about selling it. And I walked in there, and, you know, half the furniture I recognized because we'd had it either in the Vermont house or the New York house. Mm-hmm. And it was an old federal.
In other words, very period.
It was very period, yes. Nice thick walls and very high ceilings. I just said, this is it. And then when I went upstairs, I was going through one of the bathrooms. There was a cup there, and it had Rory on it. And I was like, Done.
Done. There's always there are these signs when you buy your houses.
Mm-hmm.
Is this project going to be as challenging as Julia's house?
Luckily, no, because this has 3-foot brick walls.
Okay.
And there's no way I'm touching those, and there's no way they've been disintegrating over the years. I mean, Julia Child's house really was rotten. I mean,
Yeah.
it should have been bulldozed down. I'm surprised it didn't fall down. I mean, I remember once when we were meant to save all the outside clapboards, and the guys were taking a couple of the more rotten ones off, and the entire side of the house fell off. And all we had was a frame there. So I had to go off and mill all that stuff new.
Now, I guess, and I actually am ignorant about this, any house in Georgetown, do you have to go before the old Georgetown board, or are there different degrees of house? For example, do you have to get involved with, what are the hurdles you're going to have to meet again to renovate this house that might be similar to the hurdles you had to deal with?
Well, going to the old Georgetown board on any renovation is a rites of passage. Mm-hmm. You have to do it. You have no choice.
I'm sure there are people in this room who know that.
You know, even to change your door, I believe they can come in. Yeah, they have their place, and I think I mean, relatively overall, they're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Sometimes being a bit officious about it, but I think the general direction of the ideas is good.
Right.
I mean, otherwise you'd have a hodgepodge here.
Yeah.
Of buildings, and it's rather nice to have at least some sort of historical continuity going on. When you're doing it, you just have to be used to the time. I mean, it does take a long time to get through the board.
The permit process.
The permit process. They don't meet every day because they have other jobs to do. Mm-hmm. This one, as I'm not doing as much renovation, it should be simpler. And it's not on the street corner on a national park where everybody can see everything. So that was the other problem with the Julia Child house. It was right there on the corner and everybody could see everything you did.
And everybody had an opinion.
Or two.
I know. That's so true. Have people tried to hire, since you are a kind of a self-made contractor, I mean, you are a I don't know what we would call you, a contractor, entrepreneur. You're not the conventional contractor, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, true. I wouldn't call myself contractor because I'm actually building for myself.
All right.
Each house I've had, I mean, in fact, Julia Child was the first one I didn't actually live in after building it. All the other ones I've stayed in there for quite a while.
But you are denying contractors that, anyway. Have people come to you and asked you?
Discount,
Have people come to you and said, "I love what you did with the Julia Child house. Will you do my house?"
I've had quite a few of those, and each time I've turned them down because it's not something I do. I said I'm quite happy to give you a list of all my contractors. I mean, they're all very good, and if you want them, just don't call me up afterwards if you have problems.
No, truly, he is a wealth of detailed
and the other side too
information.
is, one of my main reasons is, and this happened to me early on in this contracting business, was I feel that as soon as you are with a builder, the moment you engage, you're diametrically opposed from each other. One wants to maximize profit, and the other wants to save as much. And that will just lead to fights and arguments and the rest of it, and plus they're 30%. So that's why I decided to do it for myself. But I couldn't imagine dealing with other people on their buildings and going through that process and that angst.
Yeah, but but you've obviously got a feel for it.
Oh, it's a lot of fun.
And
I recommend you all do it too. You should all do your own houses.
But yeah, but I know the frustrations that I can just remember little things like getting the right paint for the front door. A lot of people
Painting was even harder.
Just go and buy paint, but you had to get the right color, and I respect that. I think that's a good fit with Georgetown also, that people care that much about their homes. If you had to give like the 3 most important things you learned renovating a house in Georgetown, what would they be if you were going to share them?
Look behind the walls.
What was that?
Look behind the walls, especially in a wooden house. just knock off a piece of it just to see what's there. Know what your challenges are. If you're doing a Georgetown, the stone houses are much easier. But the old wooden houses, I mean, even the clapboards, they have different sizes. I mean, we had to mill everything. So you had to find the right people to do it. I mean, and you had to find them at a reasonable price as well. So there's a lot of finding resources to be able to do things historically. Save material. I mean, when your subcontractors go in there, they just pull stuff off, throw it down, and you're going back in there searching for the design of the window awning. Now, if you had a piece, you could get somebody to make it. So there's a lot of that. I mean, I was going back through pictures, trying to figure out the designs, trying to work out the exact measurements on it. And then also for example, all the joists. I saved about half the joists in the house. Everybody was asking me all the time, what are you going to do with this stuff? I said, I have no idea yet. Sometime I'll find a use for it. And I ended up using them in the ceilings and on the steps. And that was thanks to Jean over at Chaumier. Because he came back and he said, I do, he does statues with his chainsaw. And he asked me for some of the wood. He came back with one piece. And I said, that looks pretty good. So that was
I love that. A community project.
Yes.
At its best, it's a creative process, which you enjoyed. Our time is up, but one last question. What happened to the door knocker? Where is the real door knocker?
The door knocker is a nice one.
It's the original Julia Child door knocker.
Yeah, the Times was doing that article, and it came out just as I was off in Papua New Guinea. I was visiting out there and diving, and I called up my son and I said, you need to get down to Washington and remove that door knocker off the door, because as soon as that article comes out, somebody's going to come and take it. And then I had the bright idea of taking it after he took it off and I got back, sending it up to my brother in Maine, who is an artist. He does lost wax statues. So perfect. He could give me a couple of copies. And so I sent it up there. 2 years later, I asked him what happened with the copies, where's the mold, and could I have a couple of them? And he was like, you never said that to me. So we spent another year going through his foundry looking for it. We ended up finding it above the fridge in the kitchen, actually. When I found it, the house had already been sold, so I gave it to Bob and Jennifer. And I believe they've put it actually inside the window in the kitchen rather than on the door.
Rather than back. But is a replica on the door, or is it a different?
I can't remember, actually.
I can't remember either. I guess we'll have to walk by
we'll
and
go
look.
by there and take a look.
Well, this has been marvelous, Rory. Thank you. It's just fascinating. And I hope you keep just buying and renovating houses in Georgetown and making more little jewels. But
yeah, it's going to be fun. I mean, now I'm looking at other projects now with around DC, more with the aged community to renovate their homes and try and figure out how to do that for free and put in the veterans in the other places. So
lovely.
Trying to take two communities in DC and help them out.
Well, that's great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and thank you. Have a good day. See you at the next one.